excited to do this introduction. I got to take his class. It was wonderful. So, Dr. Fred Grewe is a retired board-certified chaplain with the Association of Professional Chaplains with a Doctor of Ministry degree from the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. Dr. Grewe recently retired from his position as the interim pastor at Congregational United Church of Christ in Ashland, Oregon. His interest in working with the dying began in the early 1990s with the death of his best friend who succumbed to AIDS. Dr. Grewe is the author of Time to Talk About Dying, How Clergy and Chaplains Can Help Senior Adults Prepare for a Good Death, which has been translated into Chinese, What the Dying Have Taught Me About Living, The Awful Amazing Grace of God, 2014, and scholarly articles. So I'll hand it over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brooklyn. So to begin, I want to start with somewhat of a confession, and that is I am a verbal processor. And what I mean by that is I don't know what I think about something until I hear it come out of my own mouth. And so because of that, I can be very confused. One day I would say, well, I'm not consistent because it's always changing and evolving. And so I'm really appreciative for the invitation from Sebastian, Brooklyn, and Prakash to do this, because it's given me a chance to think out loud about something that's dear to me, but that I have not had opportunity to talk about very much. So this is not going to be a fully formed presentation. That's part of the reason I like the subtitle, Some Random Thoughts. And so this is just verbal processing of some random thoughts. The other thing I would like to say as I begin, one of my favorite spiritual writers was a man named Henry Nouwen, who died about 10 years ago. He taught at Notre Dame, Harvard, and Yale. He was a Catholic priest, and he wrote something about ministry, and I am basically a minister, that I have held near and dear, and I want to share it confessionally with you as we begin. So Henry Nouwen says, ministry means the ongoing attempt to put one's own search for God, with all of the moments of pain and joy, despair and hope, at the disposal of those who want to join the search, but do not know how. And so my approach to ministry has always been to just blurt out what I struggle and wrestle with, trusting that it may connect with someone else. And so again, this is not a fully formed philosophy or presentation, it's random thoughts. So as we begin to talk about peeking behind the veil of reality, one of the most formative, I love quotes, and this is an African proverb that I love that says, we are not merely made of flesh and blood and bones, but we are made of stories. And I view, and I'm pretty committed to this, that whatever concept of reality you and I have, we create a story to make that reality fit. Other philosophers have said, as human beings, we are story-making machines. And so everything, my approach to all of reality is that somebody's attempt at making a story make sense. And so I'm very much of this meta-narrative idea. So then the question begs, well, what do we make our story from? How do we craft a story, a life story? And I'm just going to briefly go through these because I've spoken and written about these things in various places and other times, and you could find it on the internet, or if you were really desperate, you could buy one of my books and see how this plays out. But so I'm just going to, this is a brief overview on this. But I would suggest to us this evening that we create the story of our life, the story of reality, basically out of 5 elements, I'll call them. They're not really elements, but let's just call them that to make sense. So I'll start with anamnesis, and this is a new one to my thinking. I've recently been introduced to the work of, I believe it's Jonathan Haidt, who talks about a moral foundations theory in E.O. Wilson. And so the anamnesis is a Greek word. It's an important Greek word, ancient Greek. And it means in its most elemental way, it means to remember, but it means so much more than just to remember. It's like to relive the event in this moment so that I emotionally and spiritually and intellectually feel what I felt on the original experience. So anamnesis. And for the ancient Greeks, the pre-Socratics, in fact, one of my heroes is Heraclitus, the Obscure. I love his nickname, the Obscure. And the reason he's called Heraclitus the Obscure is nobody can find anything he actually wrote. They've put together these fragments of quotes that he supposedly said that other philosophers wrote down, and so he's called the Obscure. Anyway, Heraclitus was big that to be fully human, we need to remember what's inside and access that we are all born with this intuitive something inside of us that's brilliant, and tapping into that makes us fully human. So that's his concept of an anamnesis, which was picked up later by Plato as well. So that's part of that is Heraclitus, Plato. In fact, the Greek word for truth, aletheia, means to not forget. And so for the ancient Greeks, reality was to remember what's already inside of us. It's there. It's there. It's inside. So that's one view of this anamnesis that we draw from. Another would be from a Buddhist point of view. Certainly you're familiar, I'm sure, somewhat with the whole idea of karma, that we are born with something that's already there. And where I'm going with this is, and Jonathan Haidt talks about this, we're not born blank slates, just a pure whiteboard. We come into reality, to the world, to this experience of life, with stuff that's already in there. And so these different people of times and places are trying to describe what that stuff is. And quite honestly, I think that stuff is beyond words. And so they're all sort of pointing, there's something, well, what it is, we don't really know. So anyway, from a Buddhist point of view, there is the idea of karma, that we're born, that something's already with us. Or one of the great Zen koans is, what did your face look like before you were born? Or the Buddhists talk about what is our essential nature. So they're talking about something that's resident inside, that's there or not there, if it's a nothing, but all things come from the nothing, it just can trip out. But we're trying to talk about something that we're born with, that we don't come in as blank slates. And then, of course, we have William James at the turn of the century was trying to identify how we are born with instincts, and we instinctually know certain things. And Carl Jung was big about how all of us have some intuitive knowing inside about archetypes. He talks about that quite a bit. As well as Joseph Campbell talked about that there's something in us that identifies with these big meta-narratives that's already resident within us. And then I've already mentioned E.O. Wilson and his sociobiology, and Jonathan Haidt and his moral foundations theory, all suggesting that when we are born, there's something already in there. How we access that is $1 million question. And what it is also $1 million question. As I say, language strains to try to identify what this might be. And so let me take a little excursus here for a moment and talk about language and words. What are words? Words, in all reality, are merely ciphers. They're symbols trying to communicate from one animated soul to another animated soul something, an experience, a thought, an idea. And they're just coded symbols that we agree on what the coding is. For example, in English, if I had a book here, I would say, this is a book, and you would know what I mean. But if we were in France, I would have to say, this is a biblio. It's a different symbol, a different code for the same idea. And so words are just symbols, if they're oral, if they're spoken or even written, but just ciphers trying to communicate from one animated soul to another. And sometimes these symbols break down if we don't share a mentation or share a concept of reality that is similar. These words can break down. And so we're struggling to try to communicate through symbols. All right, so anyway, that's enough of anamnesis. Then the next thing on my little list here is our actual life experience. Something happens to you or to me. And so we try to make sense of that. For example, you may win the lottery, or you may get a scholarship to go to SOU, or you may get a teaching position to mentor Prakash Chenjiri, Dr. Chenjiri. A wonderful thing may occur. And so you're all excited because it's fabulous. But experiences can be really harmful. You can be violated sexually or intellectually by someone. You can be abused. And so we have real life experiences that we try to make sense out of. Why did that happen to me? For example, if I'm of a gender that other people don't recognize, why am I this way? We try to make sense out of all that. We have an experience and we try to understand why. And so that's our real life experience. And then we filter that through our nuclear family experience. Whatever family you grew up in, you learned a number of really important things of how to process the information that comes to you in this world. I have read, when I was doing part of my dissertation stuff, that an infant coming home from the hospital within 48 hours is already beginning to suss out the power dynamics in the family. What voices can be trusted and which ones cannot. Who's in charge, who is in not. And within 48 hours, infants are learning this, processing. How does the world work? That's early coding goes into that. And one of the things I talk about when I get off on this is what our nickname in the family was, is early coding for how we process information in the world. For example, when I grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, I was Fred the Third. So my grandfather was Fred Sr., my dad was Junior, I was the third. I was always called Little Freddie. Now when I graduated from college, when I was your age in college, I weighed about 280 pounds. I weighed about 100 pounds more than I do. And do you know how embarrassing it is to go home? Little Freddie's coming home. When you're 6 foot and 280 pounds, Little Fred, but that's who I was. And so now, my wife and I are planning a trip to go back to see my sisters that all still live in West Virginia, and they got on the phone. Little Freddie's coming back I'm 72 years old. I have a doctorate. I'm not Little Freddie, but for them, that's who because all that stuff, that's why holidays can be so difficult going back for Thanksgiving or Christmas, because everybody still sees you in that nuclear family role kind of thing, and we process. And I'm telling you, that's part of how we process the experiences of the world. It filters in. All right, enough of that. Cultural worldview. All right, so this one we have more control over. And by this, we can talk about what culture not only am I born into, but that I choose to become part of. For Boudreau, the French sociologist, talks about this a lot. He calls them social habitus, if you want to study on that. But these are groups we intentionally join that help shape the way we see the world. For example, did you join the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU? Or do you belong to the NRA, the National Rifle Association? Because when you choose to join a group, you adopt the group ethos, and it helps shape the way you see the world. The group's enemies become your enemy, and the group's friends are your friends. Do you watch Fox News or do you watch MSNBC News? What groups do you identify? Do you identify here in Oregon, the big groups are beavers and ducks? What group, and here, of course, it's the Raiders, the only school, by the way, that has won a national championship in football in Oregon. But at any rate, these are groups that we join to, and it helps shape the way we filter information and we see the world and we process what we call reality. So there's our cultural worldview. For example, as an old white heterosexual male, there are certain cultural expectations that are placed on me that would not be put on me if I was a young African-American female. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just the reality of the world you and I live in. So we filter that through. And then the last one I'll identify here for you is our God concept, because this is a talk about religion. And so what it is we think or not about God very much affects our view of reality. If we think there is a mean, judgmental God, that's going to affect the way I behave. It'll affect the way I treat my dog. It'll affect the way I treat my wife. It'll affect the way I read a book. If I believe in a benevolent being that's all loving and gracious and accepting, that changes that. Or if I believe in no God, there is no God, I'm left to my own devices, that affects how I view reality. So what I'm suggesting to us is we take these 5 elemental things and we craft a big meta-narrative to figure out what is reality. Now, because this is a religious talk, I would like to quote one of the most famous voices in all of, female voices in all of Islam, the Rabia al-Basri, who lived in the 8th century, famously said, since no one really knows anything about God, those who think they do are just troublemakers. Even with that as a caveat, let us proceed. So, religions, whatever religion it is, really tries to address and give context to these 4 big existential questions that philosophers try to answer as well. That's why often religion and philosophy can be seen at odds, unless you take Dr. Chinjiri's class on science and religion, you'll see how beautifully they go together. But the 4 big existential questions that all religions are trying to answer. Who am I? Why am I alive? Right here, right now. What is the meaning of it all? What does it all mean? And how should I live? These are the big, deep, huge questions that religions tried to answer. Now somebody, I don't know who it was, a long time ago, figured out, if I can create a meta-narrative that explains the experience of death, that can talk about the afterlife, that can talk about the future and make sense of the past, I can get a big group of people together and amass a lot of power and a lot of money. If I can convince people of this one big meta-narrative story to explain all of that. And that's, I'm going to suggest, is how religions came about. Now, religions do shape our shared meta-narrative, because the meta-narrative, to have power, it needs to be in community so that we see the world somewhat alike. And in the religious world, and I would suggest the political world as well, that those who don't share the same meta-narrative get exiled, excommunicated, or exterminated. We've got to get rid of them because they are rocking the one big meta-narrative. I would suggest much of what's going on in our country today is a fight over the story, the meta-narrative. Make America great again. Well, if you were of a certain race, ethnicity, and religion, America might have been great once, but if you were not of those things, it might not have ever been great for you. And so we're fighting over the story and how we understand the story and what it all means. This is a huge fight that is going on and it happens within religions as well. Now, the word religion comes from I believe that's Latin, religare, which means to bind fast, to hold together, to place an obligation on, or a bond between human and gods. One of the things religions try to do is create a meta-narrative that many people can fit into to explain why the world is the way it is. And they share that common story, and it gives them a place to belong. But if you rock the boat and you become a heretic, or you don't believe in that story anymore, you will get kicked out. So I would suggest that right now the big fight in religions in our country, and I would suggest across the world, and also the political fight in our country, is really a fight about between an exclusive and an inclusive meta-narrative. There are some that want, and many religions are like this. We're the only ones that have it right. We're going to heaven. Everybody else is going to hell. You've got to believe our way. One of the difficulties in Christianity, the religion I'm a proud member of and affiliate with, the last time I looked, there are over 34,000 different Christian denominations. So how do you know which one is the right one? Even in our, and for those of you that are Buddhists, don't smirk. There's a lot of different Buddhists as well. Not 34,000, but there's you guys got your own. And so every group has got its, but they're all saying, our way is the right way. You've got to believe like us. It's an exclusive viewpoint. Much of what's politically going on in our country. You've got to be a patriot. You've got to red, white, and blue. America's for America, only America. It's an exclusive thing. And the fight, the big fight, is how do we make that more inclusive of genders, of races, of ethnicities, of all kinds of beliefs. This fight, exclusive and inclusive, has been going on for millennia. It's not likely to end in our lifetime. But for me, it's helpful to realize the real issue going on, whatever they're fighting about on the news feed, this is the stuff in the background that's really going on. Now, I have hope that an inclusive meta-narrative is going to emerge even stronger out of the fight we're currently in. And I love this quote by André Malraux, who was a French novelist, and he was the cultural, under de Gaulle, he was a cultural affairs minister. But I love, how many centuries has it been since a new religion shook the world? We need a new religion that is inclusive and not exclusive, and that can look at things from many different ways. And to be honest, I have great hope that the fight and the battle that we're seeing rage around us now will emerge with something like, it's my hope. I may be naive, but I'm an old man, so let me have my own dreams and wishes, all right? So, all right, so enough of that. How does it all work? What I'm suggesting, those 5 things, anamnesis, life experience, nuclear family, cultural worldview, and our God concept, all of that works together to become our data processor. So whether you're an Apple or a Windows person, those are the operating systems that run the machine. For example, I am showing you slides on a PowerPoint program that's operating off of this PC. Hidden in the background of the PC is Windows that makes the PowerPoint work so that you can see. What I'm suggesting, those 5 things I've brought forward to us tonight, operate as a operating system hidden in the background, silently doing its thing. And so we process information, and it goes through that, and we call that reality. So this data processor's in all of us. Here's how it works, at least the way I see it. So we experience something. Somebody may be really mean to me, or cut me off in traffic, or flip me the bird, or tell me I'm an old dumb man, or something. And so I have this experience. And we have experiences through our senses, sight, sound, touch, smell, taste. So we actually experience something sensually, then we run it through our data processor, the prism of our data processor, our God, concept, culture, family coding, anamnesis, trying to figure out why. And then we call that reality. That's real. Once it's filtered through all that stuff. And I'm suggesting a lot of this is very, very subjective, what we talk about, reality. And it's fluid, it's not static. And let's see. So here's some problems. So some problems with what I've just described to you, which I would suggest is the normal way we go through the world. Some problems are these. Number one, humans have a limited ability of sight and sound of all the frequencies that are out there. There are light waves that our eyes cannot perceive, and there are sound frequencies that our ears cannot hear that are all around us right now. So what our ears and eyes can see might be about like that big. And so we look at the whole universe through that when there's all this other stuff. Right now there's Wi-Fi waves going through the room, and radio waves, AM and FM radio waves going through the room. And so there's all kinds of stuff, infrared and ultraviolet and frequencies of, all that is around us right now. And we are clueless to it because we can't perceive it. But it's real, it's there. We have machinery and technology to ascertain that it's there. We just don't process it. So that's one of the problems. We have a very limited view based upon our pure sensory experience of what reality is. And another problem is our view of reality, whatever that may be, is deeply influenced by our past and the future. Now here's the deal. Our past really only lives in our memory, and the future really only exists in our imagination. So the only instant that is real is right now, and it's gone. And so much of what we think is reality is the manufacture, and this is going to sound really Buddhist if you're Buddhist, is the manufacture of our mind. Our mind is manufacturing what we think reality is. And if enough of us share a similar view, well, then we really think that's reality. And those that challenge that view, we get rid of. So that's a problem. Now here's another problem. So this is a young Irish philosopher I get a kick out of. He lives down in LA now, and he does all kind of web stuff. He's a quirky guy named Peter Rollins. Introduced this to me, and I like this slide. He says, as human beings, we all struggle between what we have and what we want, who we are and who we want to be, having to decide and not knowing what to do. This one he does attribute to Kierkegaard, for those of you that like existential philosophy. So here's the deal. Some of us, if our God concept is science, we will refer to data. What does the data say? What does the literature say to give us the best way? Because we all want to know how to make the best decision. We all want to know who we are and to get what we want. So we try to control things. And so we will refer to what does the data say or what does the literature say. Others that are more religious thinking, what does God have to say about it? I can remember in my younger years, I used to be one of those folks that would say, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. I'm not that way so much anymore. But that's a religious viewpoint. But what both science and religion are trying to do is help us navigate how to make good decisions. And this is the part of what Peter Rollins suggested that I love. We're both trying to control, either through science or religion, reality as we perceive it. But what Rollins suggests is that real life is all here in the messy middle, where it's out of control. And that's where real life is. There's something that really attracts me to that. So this is really the big problem, as I see it. And it's a millennial problem. It's been going on for thousands of years. It will probably go on until there are no more human beings. But it's the eternal tension between control and chaos. In a religious setting, this would be the tension between the theologians and the mystics, between those that write creeds and beliefs, and you've got to believe this, and those that just go with an interior knowing, a feeling, an instinct. And those two are often at loggerheads, and both are it's about trying to control the chaos. This is a massive thought for me right now, in my own life, in my day-to-day life, the struggle between control and chaos. Because here's the deal, neither one of these things is really good or bad all by themselves. If you have total control, if everything is neat and orderly and exactly as it should be, you have a cemetery. That's the only place where everything is perfectly as it should be. There's no life. But if you have total chaos, everybody's afraid all the time and nobody knows what's going to happen. And that's no way to, it's the tension between the two. And this is Heraclitus, this is pure Heraclitus, who was in the Axial Age, 5th century before the Common Era. The tension between the two, balance, the Greek whole idea of homeostasis, balance is the tension. The way Heraclitus talks about it, balance is when an archer pulls the string back and there's that tension of the string and the arrow and the bow. That is balance. That's reality. That tension between, we need both control and we need chaos. We need theologians and we need mystics because we waver back and forth. But real reality, homeostasis, health, reality, is that tension between the two. And that we're always trying to find that. And we'll slip off one side or the other. And then we got to rebalance again. This, to me, is so much of what life is about. And it's the reality. We'll save him for just a second. I want to, another way I express this, it's the dance. The cosmic dance of dealing with control and order, and so that everybody is safe and happy and it's a just world and there is thriving for all, and the chaos to help keep it alive. One of my favorite texts in the Bible, it's in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. You know, in the beginning God said, but in verse 2 it says, and the Spirit of God hovered or vibrated over the chaos, and all of creation came about. There's a wonderful feminist, liberal theologian from Grewe University, I believe, and now I'm forgetting her name. She wrote a wonderful book, The Face of the Deep. Catherine Keller, I believe is her name. Oh, golly, it's brilliant. And she talks about how all of creation is a result of the Spirit of God hovering over the chaos. And chaos is not evil or bad to be overcome. It's not demonic. God plays with the chaos. And creation is the result of God's playing with the chaos. So I see chaos as a necessary and beautiful thing. Now, it has to be within bounds for it to be safe. But it's this dance between control and chaos, which brings me to the wonderful T.S. Eliot in the Four Quartets. This is one of the most magical little quotes of his that I just love. He writes, at the still point of the turning world, and I would suggest, let's think of the still point as this one moment of reality right now, because it's not past, not future, right now, this still point of the turning world. Neither flesh nor fleshness less, neither from nor towards, at the still point, there the dance is. But neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance. And there is only the dance. And so in this moment, we're struggling between control and chaos in your own personal life, nationally in our lives. Religiously, people struggle with this a lot. But that's the dance. And for me, the dance is reality. And that's what I'm trying to cope with, to live with, and to find balance when I get a little imbalance with too much control or too much chaos. And I don't see chaos as the enemy anymore. So anyway, these are some random thoughts I've had on this topic. I have a couple of questions here for you. This should maybe provoke your thinking some. So in light of what I've suggested this evening, is it possible that there's more than one reality? Is reality something that is fixed or static? Or, as the process theologians suggest, is it a process? The process theologians, if you're not aware of them, they are Christian theologians, and I think somewhat Jewish as well, that suggest that God grows and changes along with us as we behave and make choices in life, that it's this dance. That's pure process theology. Or the other, how much of what we think is really reality is just a shared illusion that we all bought into? How much of what you and I think is real is just some shared reality? I remember once, I started off with Henry now, and I'll conclude with him, and then we can get wisdom out of the room, let you all talk and give us your insights. I got to sit in on a class that Henry Nouwen taught at Yale Divinity School. And Henry Nouwen was he was Danish, he was brilliant man. And he got off on this riff. He was talking about some people can't sit down and watch the news at night. What's going on in Ukraine, or what's going on in other parts of what's going on in Washington, D.C., what's going on in the fires in L.A., what's going on in the recent devastation in North and South Carolina from the hurricane. Some people can't sit down and watch the news, turn it off, and sit down and have a meal and say, well, sweetheart, how was your day? What'd you do? They have no capacity to do that because they so intensely feel and are impacted by what they visually saw and the suffering of other human beings going on right now on this planet at the same time as I'm breathing. How can this be? And he said, those people that have no capacity to switch that off, we put in mental institutions. And then he said, what if we're locking up the sane people? And it was like the whole room went, whoa, you could just feel. But that was, so is what we think reality just a shared illusion that we all have bought into? And reality is something totally different outside what you and I experience. I don't know. Like I told you, I'm a verbal processor. I'm just thinking out loud. But that's what I brought for us this evening. So I'll open it up. If some of you would like to either tell me how crazy I am or give an insight of wisdom from your own life, it's all play now.